Circularity is a key approach to reducing embodied carbon in the built environment. Net zero emissions are a vital part of our climate action targets. However, we also need to prioritize using global resources effectively in order to limit global temperature rise and resource depletion. We need to do more with less. In this episode, we take a closer look at how materials that commonly are looked upon as waste can be turned into valuable resources and become an asset for businesses. Leading architect Anders Linnea is founder of Linnea in Copenhagen, Denmark, with the purpose of accelerating sustainable architecture. They aim to enable the sustainable transition in and around the built environment through architecture, urban planning, strategic and material innovation, and creating new residential buildings from construction waste. Welcome to Shaping Sustainable Places, Anders Linnea.
Thank you so much for being part of it.
Let's talk first about your architecture firm. Lendager Architecture was founded with a strong commitment to sustainability. Can you tell us why this was so important for you?
It was very important for me because at the point when I made the company, this is 14 years ago, the fact and the matter was that it was impossible to do a sustainable building because there wasn't any sustainable materials and there wasn't any language about what sustainability was in the built environment. So I felt there was a need for a very big change in the building industry and also for architects to really change how we look at what sustainability is and create a potential for realizing sustainability.
I saw in your description of your company that you work with nature, science, and aesthetics. Was that a kind of a unique way of combining those elements?
Yeah, you can say that there is so many elements in these three terms that are basic DNA coding for how to create sustainability. Understanding how to build with nature, to build with science, it creates a new type of aesthetics. And I think we're just at the kind of beginning of seeing that architecture and buildings starts to have a totally different aesthetics and narrative than we've seen since the past. It's also changing how it looks. It's not a replica of how we've been building in many years, and that's also part of the challenge. We've developed a waste wood company. We've developed a waste window company. We developed a waste brick company where we are basically cutting whole buildings down and recycling 1 by 1 meter brick pieces and building new buildings with it. We've been recycling concrete, textile and plastic and fiberglass from windmill wings. So many of these ideas are all born in the building. So if you look on our website, then every building basically has one or two or more innovations inside them where we use the economy that we have to draw and build the buildings to develop a material.
Very interesting. There are three myths we sometimes talk about around recycled materials and would like to get your take. One is that they cost too much. Second is that the quality is not good. And the third is that there is not enough demand. What are your thoughts? That they're all
misperceptions. I mean, I've been working with this for 13 years and I've heard these comments since I started. And so since I've realized a lot of buildings with these types of materials, I always also seen that it's not true. It's what we're afraid of is the reality. The process, though, are different. And where you use your economy and budgets from the buildings are kind of in a different time in the project. Like you have to invest in some of these things earlier than you usually do when you just buy a normal product when you build. But other than that, we see that our buildings are a way better investment than a normal building. We see that they don't cost anything more, and we see that they reduce CO2 emissions a lot, up to between 75 and 95%. So it's very difficult to be so, I think, negative about it. And the last comment you had about not having enough material or
not enough demand. Yeah.
Not enough demand. And you can say you have to create the demand through the necessity of reducing CO2. And when you see that you need to reduce your CO2, you also need to find solutions. And today there is two types of solutions. There are, working with circular materials and recycling, or working with bioorganic materials like wood, seaweed, and so on. And those are the two, you can say, the bioorganic circuit and the technical circuit that can actually solve these things. So, I mean, the demand for reaching the goals of 70% reduction and reducing CO2 as much as possible towards the different cities' targets in Europe and the whole world, it's difficult to see that there isn't a demand.
And how much of that is sort of regulatory pressures versus people's real understanding or their own, requirements, we can say?
It goes hand in hand. It's always easy to kind of put the pressure on politicians and saying, well, if you don't regulate this, we don't see any sustainable buildings. We've seen in the Nordic countries also a demand from the builders themselves and from the industry that they know they can reach way more sustainable buildings. But if there's no really framework around it, it's difficult, to push the goals further down or save more CO2 or build more sustainable in general and more holistic. But what we're seeing now, especially in the EU, is that there are restraints and frameworks where we see the scope 1, 2, and 3, and now also the scope 4, which is where you can put all the saved CO2 from circularity in that box. We see ESG reporting. We see systematic reporting, which is regulated by both accountants companies and structural companies, and that it's something that the very big pension funds need to comply with. And that is pushing this agenda very positively forward, because it's just as important to be able to answer these targets as it is to answer the profit targets for these types of investments. And that's the regulative part for sure that has pushed this forward, and that pushes for a demand of these types of materials.
Right, and you also, I believe, on your website, you mentioned about the rethinking of behavior, processes, materials, in addition to the regulatory side of things, in order to enable the green transition. Considering those or all of these, how would you say, or what needs to be done to build up that viable ecosystem for circularity, at least circular materials in construction?
I think right now the whole key word in this is scalability and seeing lighthouse projects that are leading the way. A super important thing is that they also lead by an example on the new type of economies and processes. And that's where I see that something is really changing, that when you're creating these sustainable vehicles and they are a more profitable business, that they're creating beauty, that they're connecting people in a different way and creating new types of social environments, and at the same time creating more healthy buildings because we're not using as much chemistry and bad materials as we used to. Then something very, very positive is going on. And I think all these things are leading towards something that society really wants. And that is something that can be scaled. I see young architects, engineers everywhere coming up with new ideas on materials. They're letting go of the fact that they just want to draw a building. They want to create a sustainable material. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Nobody thought about making the material first. And now this acceleration on smarter materials, intelligent materials that are harvesting CO2 from the air, whatever it may be, they are popping up everywhere. And that is a very big change. So right now, the most important thing is that we need to scale these things. And we need the government part of it, regulation, to punish the materials that are not complying with a sustainable future, and helping the new type of materials that are doing good for society, that is making materials that you and I don't have to pay tax to get rid of waste, of cleaning up and so on, of oceans and biodiversity. And that is where we need regulation.
Right. I hear your passion when you talk, that you're really, so committed. I'm wondering if we talk specifically about reusing building materials, what excites you the most about that as an architect?
For sure, the challenge. I mean, it always puzzled me that you would be excited as an architect or designer to take something that is extremely beautiful from nature, that can be marble or it can be oak, and then think that you can do anything more beautiful with it than nature already did. But taking something that everyone considers being worthless, waste, something that they discard and almost feel bad when they look at, and then take that and transform it to something beautiful that they just need to have, touch, or be part of, or be in as a building. That's the real challenge. That's what we're educated to do. So I think for me, taking, we have a project right now that we are almost finished with. It's a high-rise in Aarhus, a wood high-rise 80 meters high, made out of massive wood. And on the facade, we have waste windmill wings, a solar shading. And when I saw these windmill wings being cut up and put in the ground at these body graves, I thought, what the hell is going on? How can something, that sustainable on the energy side end up that bad? And that's taking a real challenge on you. How do you take 70 meters long wings that are waste, cutting them up, creating a product you can build with on a new building? And that gets me up in the morning. How do you transform this into a potential new product that you can build with, that solves something, instead of buying new aluminum, new textile, new materials, a new engine to actually solve the same problem? And I think that's what we have to do. As architects and engineers and builders, this is what we need to do. Find problems and see what is the potential. And when we see the potential, execute all we can, all the power, all the brain power we have and energy, put that into that transformation so we can really, really make that change. Because in reality, it's almost this blue ocean of problems that we're looking into. And every time we see a problem, nobody has solved it before. So if we put our brains into it, it's not like you jump into an ocean of competition. You jump into an ocean of green potential that you can transform. And that's really inspiring. I think that's what all the architects in my office and everyone that's working with these types of transformations, that they're excited about.
Great. That was such an interesting example. And I'm thinking, do you have any other great examples?
Sure. I mean, I think we ended up creating basically a platform where we have architecture, and then we have our material development platform. And, a pretty cool example is also that that Carlsberg had a huge waste plastic problem with their beer kegs. And they didn't know how to solve that. So we came up with the idea how we could recycle these materials and create a circular system of these, both collecting them, shredding them, cleaning them, and creating a new product out of it. And the recycled product that was kind of the first thing we did was that it became a chair. And this chair was so robust that you could put these chairs on top of each other. And when you had 10 chairs on top of each other, you had a shelving system. And when you had 2,500 of these chairs, it became a building. because it was a building block basically. And this building became the Olympic pavilion, Danish pavilion, that showed that you could go from waste problem that was disgusting with like old beer in it to what we find a beautiful chair, a building system that could be disassembled and has now been used as a pavilion many different places, on festivals. It's been in New York for the UN Assembly. It's now been in the Olympics. And basically, it's just waste. And now it's a product, it's a company that lives and sells these waste fractions as recycled plastic.
So interesting. We'll have to include a link somehow that people can take a look at this. This is super interesting. And building new businesses from these concepts and this production.
Yeah, exactly. When we started doing this 13 years ago, there wasn't any examples of business models. So, I mean, when we talked about circular economy, then it was more about the circularity and not about the economy. And Walter Stahl, who basically invented the whole circular concept, he was, as I remember, an economist. So he built this circular model because it was about creating jobs. So we are way back before cradle to cradle. So the idea here was that you would actually create an economic system out of this approach, that things wouldn't, things would have to be repaired. Things would have to be in a circular system to continue having jobs and so on locally. And that's what we've seen, that you can do and create interesting business out of this. And I wanted to show that the economy in circular economy was something that someone wanted to invest in. So I actually spent time and hired some consultants that actually made a business model like you normally do when you have to raise money for, a great idea. But I was so curious to see, would anyone invest in these ideas, or was it just me that thought it was a good idea? And the first time we wanted to get too much money into this pond the first time, so we didn't reach more than 60% of the target, and then I learned that then everything falls apart. And then I said, we have to do it again. Let's lower the budget a little bit, and then let's try again. And then we succeeded. And then a lot of investors came in, a main investor, and now today it's a company on its own that bought 5 of these innovations that are now scaling up, systematically making a kind of a professional product, if you can call it so, that everyone can buy. And that's what I mean about scaling it and meeting and complying with the existing economy. But this is a waste product, basically, that is circular. And that's, I think, was an important task for me to show that was kind of the end or the start of these materials through an architectural design process.
Great. Anders, so interesting talking with you today. Thank you so much for all your insights.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Ciao.
So what is the biggest challenge when it comes to scaling reuse materials in the built industry, and how can that be overcome? Skanska Industrial Solutions offers complete solutions in providing asphalt, rock material, concrete, infraservice, and rental equipment for the construction industry. And they're trying to scale projects that are focusing on the idea of waste as a resource. Barbro Brattström Grujovic is business developer, Skanska Sweden. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
As I understand it, the regulatory landscape around surplus materials is complex. Almost everything classifies as waste from the start. And for getting the volumes of materials back into the loop of construction, hard work, dedication, and change is needed. What do you say about that, Barbro?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but it says like that. If you want to get rid of something, it becomes a waste, even if it's perfect material. I think we have to stop see waste as waste and see it as a resource instead. So that's what we try to do. We try to recycle it. And to be a recycled product, you have to be in a mechanical process. So that's what we do. We have special permits and treat waste materials or materials that normally is going for landfill. Mostly I've been working on a project called the circular concrete, making it look like a normal concrete aggregate. I think one of our goals is to have like a shelf with recycled materials that you can always go, like when you go to your local supermarket and buy milk that is ecological, you're going to come to our sites and buy recycled materials. And the more you talk with your customers and asking what they want, they just want the materials. So that's good as well. But you have to create an ecosystem as well with receiving materials and getting them out again on the market.
And how do you build up a viable and economically attractive ecosystem for circular materials and construction? Would you say that exists now, or where are we?
I think we're there as well. Like small baby steps. We're doing just like expanding the business all over Sweden, for example. We start a lot of resource parks to be able to deliver the products and start treating them. So I think we're on the upcoming. Maybe now we have about 10 in Sweden, and we have a plan that we're going to double or triple that in a couple of years. So I think in the future this is not going to be a problem.
You seem very interested and committed in this whole area.
Yeah.
Would you say? I mean, are you in this for the long term?
Yeah, I hope so. This is like my passion. If I talk about this, my family is falling asleep, and I'm really happy. Now, I like innovation. I like new products. I like to make a difference. So it's like, it keeps me going every day to work.
Okay. So how important is circularity? Why is it so important in the building industry?
We live in a society now that everything has to be new. And we have seen that it's not sustainable. So I think we have to be able to reuse more and recycle, because we have perfect materials that's just going to end up as landfill. If you really commit and engage and talk and communicate this with your colleagues and you find solutions, Skanska has a lot of knowledge. And I talk to universities, I talk to companies, I try to promote what we're doing because I think it's great.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Barbro, for your time today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We need to do more with less to reduce carbon emissions, and circularity is a key way to achieve that. We reduce extraction of virgin materials, and instead our built environment becomes a material bank that also has a value for the owner in the future that does not exist today. Anders Lendager, founder of Lendager in Copenhagen, Denmark, says circularity is transforming the way we see beauty in the built environment. Building with waste materials doesn't necessarily have to cost more, he explains, while it can slash carbon emissions. Barbro Grujovic from Skanska, Sweden, says there is already a viable ecosystem for circular materials in the construction industry, even if it is still young. Skanska is expanding the number of circular resource parks across Sweden, where controlled surplus material can be brought in, refined, and used for new homes, infrastructure projects, and other construction. Thank you for listening, and special thanks to our guests Anders Lendager and Barbro Grujovic for joining us today on Shaping Sustainable Places. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out in the future. If you have any thoughts about this episode or ideas for new ones to come, don't hesitate to reach out to podcast@skanska.com. We'd love to hear from you. This is a podcast from Skanska, a leading property development and construction group. To find out more about how we and others are creating healthy, resilient communities and spaces, visit us at foresight.skanska.com. I'm Emily Mandel. Thank you for joining us as we explore shaping sustainable places.